Wearables. Are they useless? Are they useful? Do we love them? Do we hate them? Let's find out. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kyle. I'm a strength coach, a physical therapist, and the founder of Athletic Resilience. And if you haven't been here before, welcome to the channel. Today, we are going to talk about wearable technology and how you can best utilize and implement them to manage your training, health, wellness, lifestyle, etc. I think we have all seen them out and about a little bit more often now, whether or not you have a friend that has a Whoop, an Oura Ring, an Apple Watch, a Garmin, and I mean, pick your poison, right? There's a new one coming out every day pretty much at this point. I think it's incredibly easy to get overwhelmed, to get obsessed, and to let wearable technology completely take over your life. We need to be really careful in where we put our focus and our emphasis in terms of the data that we pay attention to. Wearables at this point provide kind of an overwhelming amount of information. And if you open up the Whoop dashboard, you even open up something like AthletIQ, which is going to just port over all the data from an Apple Watch. Those kind of back-end systems, there's pages and pages and pages and pages of data that you probably didn't even know you needed. And you start to sit back and have that conversation with yourself about, is this something that I should have been paying attention to up until this point? Is this something that's completely useless? So the number one rule that I follow myself and that I make sure my athletes follow is to pay attention to the objective data and metrics that these wearables allow you to collect, not any metric that they've come up with that has some sort of proprietary algorithm attached to it. That means any of the recovery scores, the strain scores, things like that, those things are connected to algorithms that have been created by Whoop, by AthletIQ, by this company, by that company, to essentially aggregate the hard objective data that your Apple Watch or your Whoop is collecting and turn it into something that they've deemed meaningful. I'm gonna be honest, that information is not always meaningful in the sense that most of us who are using these things have experienced a situation where you've woken up and your recovery score said that you need to go back to bed, and that was a PR day at the gym, and vice versa. You've woken up and gotten the green light, gone to the gym, and essentially got hit by a freight train. But what they all are fairly accurate at is tracking things like heart rate, HRV, sleep. And there's actually great people on YouTube that have done kind of some of that comparative research for you to help you dial in and figure out which wearable might be best for you and your circumstances and situation. There are just, certain wearables are better at doing certain things. And that's a decision only you can make in terms of what you're hoping to gain out of having that wearable as part of your day-to-day routine. So I thought it might be meaningful to go over the things that I have my athletes pay attention to and the things that I pay attention to myself whenever I'm utilizing wearable technology. And I covered this a little bit in the shorts that I've put up until this point, but the best way to utilize this technology is to look for trends. So let's break down the metrics that are relevant that your wearables are tracking. HRV is a direct measurement of the push and pull between your sympathetic and parasympathetic branches of your autonomic nervous system. When your autonomic nervous system is in balance, and when you are in fairly good shape, and you are well recovered and not sick and not overly stressed, your HRV scores will be high. If you are sick, if you're overtraining, if one of the branches, typically your sympathetic, not as often your parasympathetic, but if one of your branches has kind of overtaken that balance, that HRV score starts to tank. What this means is that you can use trends in your HRV data to make determinations about whether or not you're over or under training, whether or not that dietary change you made is positively or negatively affecting you, whether or not you are positively or negatively adapting to the programming that you've come up with, whether or not you're sleeping well, possibly even whether or not you're getting sick. It's a great metric and one of the ones that I look at the most closely, not meaning on a day-to-day basis, but one that I look at more regularly on a week-to-week basis from a trend perspective. Heart rate, especially resting heart rate, is another metric that wearables track fairly well. When resting heart rate starts to trend downwards, that's an indication typically that you are becoming more aerobically capable and that you are recovering fairly well. When resting heart rate starts to trend upwards, that's typically an indication either that you're getting sick, that you're stressed, taxed, or that you happen to be overtraining. So again, can provide similar insights to HRV, though not necessarily as direct of a look kind of at a branch of your nervous system as HRV tends to be. Sleep is the third primary metric that I tend to care about from wearables. And what I'm looking at is both sleep quality and sleep quantity. And when we're looking at sleep quality, we tend to be comparing the amount of deep and REM sleep as it relates to the amount of core or light sleep. There are, roughly speaking, healthy ratios of how much deep and REM you should have relative to core and light. And so over the course of a couple of weeks, we can start to track whether or not things that you've changed in your lifestyle, behaviors, etc., are making net positive or net negative impacts on you. Sleep is one of the first things I'll look to if I'm working with someone and we are starting to tweak some things in their diet and some of the things that they're eating. Sleep is one of the things we'll start to look at if we started to tweak lifestyle habits and things of that nature. So those are the big three things that I'm mainly utilizing wearables to track. Again, that doesn't mean that the rest of the data is worthless or useless, but I do try to emphasize a little bit of caution with, again, some of those proprietary metrics that aren't just hard objective facts. So I'll use my story as an example of how not to integrate wearable technology into your life. When I first started using the Whoop, it was when I had just gotten into grad school. Stress was incredibly high. Days were incredibly long. I was trying to train on the side at the same time. And I added this new thing in the wearable that I thought was gonna help me dial things in and live a better, healthier lifestyle. All it ultimately did was add to my stress and strain. And I ended up progressively sleeping worse and worse and worse and worse over the course of the first few months that I had the Whoop on, to the point where everything was actually deteriorating and not getting better because I was so obsessed over the data that it was providing. And so I ended up having to take it off. Fast forward almost 10 years, it's taken me 3 separate times to integrate it in a fashion where it is a positive addition to my life and not negative and detracting and becoming something that I obsess about or something that ultimately just ends up being overwhelming. And I know that I'm not the only one that feels that way. I've talked to plenty of athletes, plenty of friends that have all had fairly similar experiences, fairly similar results where they tried to start utilizing this technology and found that it was like consuming and kind of the only thing that they thought about. And they were making fairly large judgment calls and changes in their lifestyle and behavior based on data that might or might not be accurate and wasn't necessarily based on how they were feeling at the time, but purely based on what their Whoop or Apple Watch was telling them was the appropriate thing to do. And that's why I said that wearables on the whole are best utilized to look at trends, because it can be very easy to panic on a day-to-day basis if there's certain specific things you're paying attention to, especially some of those proprietary metrics like Whoop's recovery score in the morning or the strain score, where it says, hey, don't go over this strain today or else like all hell's gonna break loose. And so you panic when you go over that strain score for the day, or you wake up and the recovery score literally says like you need to like essentially not move for the rest of the day. So you panic and don't move, but then you spend the rest of the day wondering why you feel so good on a day that it's telling you you should feel like shit. And that's why obsessing over this data on a day-to-day basis ends up really just detracting from your overall quality of life. Now, there are absolutely times when I think even some of those proprietary metrics can be valuable. I worked with some of the USA sailing team for a while, and we looked at their strain scores constantly. And that's just because of the volume of training and sailing that they were performing. Like, we needed something that wasn't as nitty gritty as heart rate data. So in circumstances like that, those metrics can in fact be helpful. And that's why the answer to a lot of these, are these things good, are these things bad, is always gonna be an it depends, right? It's circumstantial in the sense that, are you doing enough from a training perspective where a metric like that is actually valuable? Or are you not training enough where even having metrics at all is needed, right? Only you know, in terms of like your overall training load, the stress in your life, kind of what's going on at any given moment in time, whether some or all of these metrics are gonna be useful or not to you based on what they're providing. It also tends to be easier on the whole for aerobic athletes to track some of these metrics because heart rate is a much more linear response to sustained aerobic activity, in the sense that if you go out and you run a fairly similar pace for a fairly similar distance, on the whole, your heart rate is going to trend in a similar region. And these wearables have an easier time picking up more consistent exertion with less kind of external noise and movement, if you will. Whereas people like your barbell athletes might have a little bit more inconsistency in how these wearables are tracking their exertion, their strain, their output, etc. So if we're looking at how to use these wearables intelligently, The main things that you're concerned with are pairing it with performance and your lived experience, and to use it as more of an informational auditing tool as opposed to something that dictates your day-to-day existence. People try to incorporate them with a very trees over the forest mentality, when really they are best utilized as a forest over the trees mentality. They're kind of at their most accurate and their most helpful when you're looking at things from a 10,000 foot view above and saying, oh wow, I've noticed that over the past couple of weeks, I've implemented XYZ periodization scheme for my training, or I've started to change XYZ thing in my diet, or I've changed XYZ thing before I go to bed. And you can look at those changes that you've made and start to make good, accurate decisions because you're seeing a net positive or a net negative based on the things that you've modified. Does that mean that it's helpful all the time? No, absolutely not. It can be incredibly easy to tip over into excess, especially if you are someone who is fairly data-driven, very logical in how you think. It can be almost too much of a good thing to have all of this data available at your beck and call all the time. In those circumstances, it is healthy to take a break from some of these things, from some of these wearables, to kind of help you recenter a little bit and get back to trusting how you feel and trusting your lived experience over an Apple Watch, a Whoop, an Oura Ring. So do I think we're better off having these wearables and having this data at our fingertips? Yeah, 100%. Having access to this information has really allowed coaches, athletic trainers, PTs to kind of nip things in the bud ahead of time before they really become a huge problem. And I think that that's something that's incredibly valuable. But as with most things in life, balance is needed and is necessary. And if you start to notice, as a coach, that one of your athletes seems to be trending in the wrong direction and be obsessing over things, might be time to pull back and kind of take the wearable off. If you start to recognize that you yourself are trending in the direction of becoming a little bit obsessive about things, take it off for a month, see how you feel. But if you are training fairly consistently and you have yet to get a wearable, I would probably advocate looking into them just to help you make better overall training, performance, health, wellness, lifestyle choices going into the future. I'll be doing some deeper dives on some of the topics that were covered in this video in future videos, but if there's anything specific that I brought up or that you feel like that I missed that you would like covered in more detail, please don't hesitate to get down in the comments and let me know. And if you haven't already, please give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, go check out the other content that I posted, and I'll see you in the next video.